We are San Jose.
Siamo San Jose.
We are San Jose.
We are San Jose.
We are San Jose.
We are San Jose.
Welcome to We Are San Jose. These are your stories.
I'm Santa Clara County Supervisor Dave Cortese, currently the President of the Board of Supervisors, but today I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the city of San Jose and this valley, going back 100 years, back well into the time of the Valley of Heart's Delight. And you know, I have two sides of my family, just like everyone, but the maternal side of my family was really from the city of Santa Clara, so I want to talk about some of this history in the context of the paternal side of my family, which really has been here about 100 years. My grandfather came here as an immigrant from Sicily, and he came here as a teenager by himself, penniless. It's a story that you will see over and over and over again if you look back at the history of San Jose, especially at the time of the turn of the last century. And this city was really built, of course, by pioneers who came before the turn of the last century, but built upon by Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants, and of course the mass immigration that we've had since then that's created such a multicultural city that we have now, one of the most multicultural cities in the world. And so what was it like back then, and how would I know? People often ask me, especially since I'm a political figure, Dave, you're a lifelong resident. Were you born in San Jose Hospital? I was actually born in Fort Ord, California, because it was 1956. My parents were just married. My father was still serving at the tail end of the Korean War in the United States Army. That was typical of people in this valley at that time, and very typical of how this valley began to grow after that, after World War II and the Korean War. But I want to go back again a little bit further. What were things like at the turn of the last century? This was not only an agricultural valley, but it was the heart of agricultural production all over the world. We talk now about exporting apples, as in Apple computers. Back then, this area led the entire world in exporting things like pears, cherries, prunes, canned fruit. There were major canneries here, and it was a major part of the industrial production of the city of San Jose. So my grandfather, my grandparents on the Cortese side of the family, like so many Italian Americans who came here as first generation, worked in canneries and tried to make their way out of that working for wages lifestyle to make something better of their lives. And it really is a major part of the story of the city of San Jose, that these immigrants came here, wanted more for themselves, more for the next generation, but they were really thinking even generations beyond their own children. And that's very much a part of, again, not only my family, but so many of the families that surrounded us as I was growing up here. Almost a Midwest kind of mentality, if you will. The whole family was expected to participate in agricultural production by the time I was a kid. You started working when you were 10 years old. There wasn't any such thing as a summer vacation. Summer vacation was working in an agricultural environment from the day school ended until the day school started again in the fall. And what did that mean? How do you put that in perspective? Just to give you an example, I remember living on one particular orchard, a 50-acre orchard in Evergreen, that in 1 week's time generated 600 tons, not pounds, 600 tons of apricots that were exported out of the area to feed people not only here, but eventually in other places in the world. 50 acres, and you're talking about one of the largest counties in the state of California, so you can imagine the production that was happening back then and what a significant thing it was and what opportunity it created for young people. Work ethic, of course, but also an opportunity to feel good about yourself, to learn something, and in some cases to make a few dollars of your own money. So whether young people of my era were working in the canneries or working in the fields, it was very commonplace in this valley through the 50s and 60s, and maybe even early 70s to have those kinds of opportunities. The Italian Americans were so predominant here after the turn of the last century, such a major immigration group or ethnicity, that there are many, many towns in what Italians call paeses, in places like Sicily, where my grandfather came from, where the population here now far outnumbers the population of the home village of what they would say is the old country. So, for example, the town that my grandfather was born in and came from when he was about 15 years old to America had about 4,000, a population of about 4,000. That village still only has a population of about 7,000 persons. It was estimated about 15 years ago that the diaspora, the ancestors of that village here in San Jose now exceed 100,000 total relatives, total ancestors. So it's very commonplace if you're an Italian American and you're social and you're among other Italian Americans to encounter people anywhere here, Little Italy or at a social club or at an event, who immediately introduce themselves as hailing from the town of Trabia. I just came from an event today at San Jose City College where one of the professionals walked up to me and said, I know your grandparents are from Sicily, mine are from Palermo, which is 30 kilometers away. For those of us who are Italian Americans, no matter if you're from Sicily or mainland Italy, that is a common occurrence here, socially and professionally in this valley. And I want other San Joseans to know how proud people of Italian American ancestry are of the contributions that their families made here to this valley, not only in agriculture, but of course in areas like politics and in business. Many of the big developments, even in downtown San Jose, are now tied to Italian American entrepreneurs who over the years built their way up and invested in real estate and in other endeavors that grace our fine city at this time. But San Jose itself went through a great metamorphosis, and I keep talking about the agricultural days. What everybody knows who's been here a while is that downtown San Jose once had people flowing up and down the sidewalks and streets all during the daytime hours, Monday through Friday, certainly 5 days a week, if not 7 days a week. And it's been a long, hard struggle for those of us who grew up as kids walking those streets, experiencing the great department stores and the movie theaters and the civic life, the vibrant life, to work hard now, whether we be elected officials or business people or just civically engaged third or fourth generation Italian Americans and residents and citizens of this area, to try to bring that vibrancy back. And it's an important thing to do because it is at the heart of the civic life that we want people to experience, that we want our children to experience. And we aren't going to bring back the agricultural days, but we can certainly bring back the civic life that our grandparents and our parents and that we experienced as young people in this community. To me, that's the real San Jose story. It's been a place of opportunity and quality of life. It always has. It was for my grandparents. It was for the grandparents of every Italian American who lives here today. And it needs to be the same for our own children. A place that doesn't ever lose its opportunity and its quality of life. That's the real San Jose story, and I hope it's one that continues for generations to come.
My name is Lee Kopp, born and raised in San Jose, very proud to have lived here all my life, and I've spent most of my life in the arts in San Jose, which is not the usual life choice, but it just kind of happened for me. And I want to talk mostly today about one of my favorite theaters, the California. People know it as the Fox, who've been here a long time, but it started out in 1927 as the California. It was a vaudeville house and movie house, and one of the most beautiful on the West Coast. And it stayed a vaudeville and movie house through most of its early life. But in 1973, it closed after years of being the Fox Movie Theater. When the Fox chain took it over, they covered up all of the beautiful decor inside. It was a mix of Moorish and Turkish and neoclassical and just beautiful, beautiful decorations and designs. But slowly they started plastering over things, covering it up with plywood, painting it garish colors or black. And the place just fell into ruin. In 1973 it closed, and it stayed closed for decades. It was a real tragedy. They almost tore it down a couple of times, and a fire almost took it at one point. But people loved that house who had been there as children or as young adults and fought to get it back up. And really, the only reason it did survive and was restored was through the generosity of the Packard Foundation. David Packard, as I understand it, went to the city and said, if you put up half the money, I'll put up half the money and we'll restore this. It wound up costing $75 million and took a number of years to redo. But the place is just gorgeous now. And I am so surprised at how few people have been inside it since it reopened 10 years ago. I work there to this day. Actually, the first movie I ever saw there, I think, was Lady and the Tramp back in the 50s. And it was just, it blew me away, because walking into that place was like going into a museum. It was so gorgeous. And the movie, of course, was wonderful. And they did CinemaScope there later on. I remember seeing a lot of good Westerns. I think How the West Was Won I saw there, with intermission and an opening overture, and I just thought, my God, this is so different. I loved it. And earlier than that, I remember seeing a lot of horror movies there. Vincent Price in House on Haunted Hill. If you've never seen that movie, you ought to take a look at it. There's a scene where he boils bodies in a pot of acid. And in one scene, he's like with a giant fishing reel, is lifting a skeleton out of the vat of acid. And as he does that, the skeleton disappears out of frame. And all of a sudden, a skeleton came out of the movie theater drapes and flew around the theater. And people were screaming like crazy. And then it goes back into the drapes just as you see him bringing the skeleton back into frame. It was real theater and a movie put together. And The Tingler, I think was that same year, sometime around 59 maybe. And they installed these little vibrating machines under the seats. And when The Tingler struck, all of a sudden they'd turn on the vibrations and people jumped out of their seats and were just screaming like crazy. It was great. It was really wonderful entertainment. I spent most of my life while that theater was open, going to movies there as a child, of course. As a older boy, I lived in Rosemary Gardens at that time. I would jump on my bike and I would come downtown, and they would do double features at that point. So I would see a couple of different movies, a newsreel, a cartoon always opened every show. I think usually a Warner Brothers, like a Wile E. Coyote or a, one of those. And then I'd go out and I'd go down to Woolworths and grab open face turkey sandwich, hot turkey sandwich, strawberry shake, that type of thing. Go over to Houston's Hobby Shop, which was just down the street, and race slot cars. And they had a penny board with coins on it, and you could make bids. And you write your bid down, then you'd come back at the end of the day and see if you won that bid. So it was all day downtown. It was so packed back in those days. It was wall-to-wall people, not like today. But that south of First Street area, which is pretty vibrant now again today, was my home when I was a kid. I just loved that place. And then during college, I went to San Jose State, and I would frequent that area. But in those days, the theater was really pretty derelict. It was being used as a rock and roll house, and it was being torn up, really torn up. I remember though one day the back door was open, and I just slipped in just to see what was going on. And I heard some music, and I went up in the balcony, and down on stage were a couple of guys just playing acoustical guitar, and you could hear every note, because the acoustics in that place, it was built as a vaudeville house, I told you. The acoustics were so good that just unamplified, you could hear every note. And I started listening, and I started watching, and then a couple more guys came up on stage, and it was the Doobie Brothers rehearsing for a show they were going to be doing later that night. And I just sat there for about a half hour and listened to them just practice. It was great. Other memories of that place were not good, because it fell into such disrepair. I was always afraid they were going to tear it down, and it was so heartening to see the work start on that place again. I didn't know what they were going to do with it, because they had totally ruined the front with this huge, ugly marquee. It used to have the beautiful Blade marquee, they call it, that they did restore. And I'd stick my head in any chance I got just to see what they were doing. Everything was done just the way it was in 1927. Even the instruments, the lamps were replaced, and instead of using plastic liners, which they wanted to do, they used mica. Now, mica hadn't been mined in years, but David Packard said, "You're not using plastic in my theater." And he opened a mica mine just to mine that mineral and have it sliced to fit the instruments. He had special carpet and special drapes woven extra tight, so that when they do show a movie in there and they have popcorn, the smell of the popcorn oil doesn't get into the fabrics, because that's one of the reasons that most of the time you can't use an opera house as a movie house. Little touches like that made such a huge difference. Today, I'm working with the symphony and helping to bring thousands and thousands of kids and teachers to that theater to show it to them. We had 9,000 people there in the last 2 weeks, and of those, I bet you not more than 200 of them have ever been in the theater. You've got to do yourself a favor. You've got to go see something there. The opera is there. The symphony is there. They show silent movies occasionally with organ accompaniment, 2 beautiful Wurlitzers in that place. Do yourself a favor. Go see that. It's a San Jose experience that you will never forget. And I'm just so proud of that theater. I'm proud of San Jose. I'm proud to have been here all my life. And I'd just like to share that with everyone. So thanks for this opportunity to talk to you. And again, my name's Lee Kopp, and this is my San Jose story.
Hi, I'm Jan Coleman, and I've lived in San Jose for 56 years. I arrived on May 3rd, 1959, and I remember that date because it was my first wedding anniversary. I flew by plane to San Jose because I was 8 months pregnant, and my husband drove cross country in a VW bus that never got over 45 miles an hour all the way cross country. He was exhausted by the time he got here. We went to a motel, I think it was, and stayed there for a couple days until we found a place to live. And the first morning that we went out for breakfast, we were served strawberries as bigger than golf balls. I had never seen strawberries that big, and it's like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then in the afternoon, we went to my husband's boss's home. He opened up his sliding glass door and went out and picked lemons and limes. And of course, we didn't have that in Schenectady either. It's cold back there, and here it was nice and warm, and I thought, my first day in San Jose, I'm in heaven. So I just loved being here. Our first place to live was a duplex, which we rented for about 5 months, and it was on Union Avenue. And it was brand new and close to some of the stores, so I could walk. We just had one car at that time, and so if I needed to go someplace, I would take my husband to work and then go on. And I drove with a map right here because not knowing the city, I had to have a map and map everything out before I got there. Let's see what else. My husband was on a 2-year assignment for GE. And after we lived here a while, I said to him, I don't care where you have your new assignment, but please just send me my money each month because I'm not leaving San Jose. And lucky for us, he got a permanent job here. So I've lived here a long, long time. My son was born in San Jose Hospital, which was the only hospital at that time. There was no Good Sam or O'Connor hospitals. And it was a good hospital. Our first home that we bought was $17,500, if you can imagine. No down payment. We just walked in. We had enough money to buy our appliances, and that's about all. But we really wanted an Eichler home, which was being built near Kirtner and Meridian. And that house was selling for $21,500. We couldn't afford it. I doubt that my husband was even making $10,000 at that time. And with the first child, we were afraid of spending too much on the house. But 5 years later, we did move into an Eichler, and at that time, it had increased in $3,000 only. And so we got the house that we really wanted after all. Hard to believe that the prices were so low at one time. Those houses are selling for well over $1 million now, well over. The first March was exceptionally warm living here, and my husband had built a deck with a pergola over it, and it was a very warm day, and I remember being out on the deck ironing in my bikini. Now, it's never been that warm again in March, ever since 59, or 60, I guess, at that time. But I remember that because I used to love calling back home and telling them what the weather was like here. On Saturdays, we did our chores. And that means like washing the car and fixing anything in the house that needed to be done. But Sunday was our day of adventures. And around San Jose and in San Jose, there were many things to go see. So we had a wonderful time. And the first time we drove to San Francisco, nobody told us about the change in weather. And so we took no sweaters or jackets, and we couldn't get out of the car. I packed a picnic lunch, and we just froze up there. So we stayed in the car and ate, never did get out to go to a park or anything. At this time, there was no organic foods or farmers markets, but and no recycling at this time. But my husband and I did recycle, and every 3 to 6 months, he'd take everything over, I guess, to the landfill, which is where they had some recycling there at that time. San Jose was still a farming community at this time, and there were tons of fruit trees, and in the spring they all blossomed. And if you stood on what is now called Blossom Hill Road, you could look down in the valley and just see all of these trees, different colors, just blossoming. It was beautiful, and that's how it got its name, Blossom Hill Road. Highway 17 from Santa Cruz stopped at Bascom Avenue, just stopped. And from there on Bascom, you were on city streets if you were going into like Santa Clara, or the Humane Society was out there at that time. Population here was approximately 200,000 compared to over 1 million now. So the streets, although we didn't have all the freeways we have now, it wasn't bad driving at all because there weren't that many cars and people weren't in such a big rush the way they are today. So I didn't have any trouble even though I had never driven in Schenectady. San Jose was my first time driving. Until we moved into our home, I didn't know anybody, so it was just Carl and Chris and me. And I started thinking about how brave I was, or else very naive, to leave my family in Schenectady and come out here where I knew no one, and be willing to take a chance that I was going to love it out here. And I did, and I've never been sorry about my decision. And that's my story of San Jose.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next time.